think that outcomes outweigh team and individual performance metrics, right? Like I said, is the product good? Is the product stable? Is the product meeting business objectives? To me, as an engineering manager, those are the things that matter most.
Welcome to Tech Teams Today. I'm Lucas Mendes, CEO of Revelo, and it's great to have you here. We're going to have a webinar on March 13th, Engineering Team Metrics That Actually Matter in 2025. You can find the registration link in the notes of this episode. But back to today's episode. Today we're joined by Ryan Cooley, Director of Engineering at ProcessMaker. ProcessMaker is a low-code automation platform that helps companies design business processes in seconds. It automates processes using next-gen AI and helps businesses unlock the full productivity of their workforce. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right. So to start, we like to have our guests sort of walk us through their background and journey. So if you can give us a little bit of a walkthrough, it would be great.
Sure. I think my journey was probably a little bit non-traditional. I don't know, but I started when I was around the age of 10 or so. I probably got really into computers. This was back in I don't want to date myself too much, but this was back in the mid 90s. So the internet and the World Wide Web were a brand new thing back then. And I remember coding my very first personal web page on, I'm trying to remember what the tool was at the time, but it was something akin to Notepad,
Mm.
and uh, publishing it to Prodigy. So if that dates me even more. But I really got into HTML and all of that, and kind of just got into everything. I would consider myself to be kind of a master of none, but I like to dip my toes into anything related to technology. So I got into obviously programming. I went to a high school for technology. It was specifically what they call out here. I don't know if they have them everywhere, but out here they call them magnet schools. And these are schools that take in kids from all over the city and help them to specialize in different areas. Here in the Las Vegas Valley, where I live, we have two primary magnet schools. One is primarily directed at theater kids, and then the other is directed at technology nerds, basically. And I very much fit into the category of a nerd. So I went to that high school here locally, and they give you a choice of things that you can actually major in high school. And so I majored in information technology, which actually had a different name at the time. But during that time, I learned a ton about programming, introductions to computer science. I learned a lot about relational databases. And so that's where I really got a feel of how much I enjoy working with this technology. And then from there, I kind of went down a different path, and I learned a little bit about video production and all of the things that go into that, media production. So, like I said, anything to do with technology, I was into. Eventually, I found my way to becoming an individual contributor at a small startup here in Las Vegas. They actually produced toys, but they needed somebody to build a website and e-commerce platform for them. So I did that. And then after that, I found my way to ProcessMaker, and I started there as an individual contributor, as an engineer on a team, basically a skunkworks team that was being built here in Las Vegas. I know it's not a very traditional tech town, but our CTO at the time was based out of Las Vegas. And so he was building kind of a skunkworks team to build the next version of ProcessMaker's application platform. So that was the team that I joined. It was a very small team at the time, around 6 people. And since then, we've expanded and grown to the point where at some point along the way, they asked me if I was interested at all in management. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. It's something I was kind of used to from my media production days, kind of managing teams of people. So I stepped into that role, and I haven't looked back since.
Great. I want to double click on that part. How was that move going from being an IC, committing code every day, to managing team? How much coding did you keep doing?
It's a great question. I think at that point, my coding turned from traditional day to day building the product stuff to more along the lines of things that would help me to manage the team, right? So or things that would improve the overall outcomes for the team. So things like building out our CI/CD pipeline, things like that, that kind of helped the whole team. Those are the programming tasks that I focused on. But I would say over time, I've certainly done less and less coding to the point where I do it very little anymore. But I'd still try to do side projects at home and everything to kind of keep in touch with the latest technology, and especially as we're learning more and more about AI and its role in engineering. I want to make sure that I'm up to date with all of the latest tooling around AI so that I can help pass some of that knowledge on to my team.
Got it. So a lot of guests on our show actually move around quite a lot. They do the Silicon Valley shuffle, and you've been at Process Maker for 6 years. You started there as a software engineer. Now you run the engineering department. How does an aspiring engineer go about doing that? Can you walk us through that journey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think probably my location played a big role in it. Like I said, Vegas is not a typical tech town. I would say if probably 10 years ago when I started here, it was a burgeoning tech scene here in Las Vegas, and there was a lot of optimism. A lot of that, frankly, came from Tony Hsieh and him building out Zappos here in Las Vegas after the Amazon acquisition. He acquired large swaths of downtown Las Vegas to turn into like a tech hub. Unfortunately, he did pass away, and after that, I would say we've seen kind of a downturn in terms of how the tech scene is growing here in Las Vegas. But it's not just that. I think a lot of it is related to post pandemic. We at Process Maker, for example, we had 10 people in Las Vegas prior to the pandemic, and then after that, with the ability to work fully remote, a lot of people went different directions. Now we're down to 3 people here in the Las Vegas Valley. Um, so all of that to say, for me, I really do value stability. I'm not used to doing the Silicon Valley shuffle, as you said, and for me, that works. I know that that's not going to work for everybody. I know that's not necessarily the norm in the industry, but for me, it works. And I prefer stability in life rather than hopping from company to company. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are kind of like minded. And those are the types of people that tend to fit better on our particular team. Like I said, can be totally different for other people, and I understand people have different priorities. But for our team, I think stability has played a big role in our success.
I was going to ask that actually. So, is that something that you try to implement in your team to keep them motivated and engaged for the long haul? Apart from selecting people who have a like-minded profile, is there anything that you put into practice to ensure that stability?
Yeah, I think we really value, just to give you some background on Process Maker, for example, this company's been around for I think over 20 years now, and it started for its first 15 years or so was a completely bootstrapped company. Never took any money, never took on any debt, and so it was really what some people might call like a lifestyle business, right? Where you come in and you can stay here for a very long time. Since then, we did take a round of funding from private equity, and so that has kind of changed the nature of the company a little bit. But we still very much value long-term stability, and we really think long-term with our hiring. So one of the questions that we ask in interviews is, how do you see yourself fitting into Process Maker in the long term? And if they, excuse me, if they answer that they really value that type of stability, we know that maybe that's the type of person that will fit in well here at Process Maker. Um, and I think for me, I'm a big hockey fan, and I kind of liken it to if you're familiar with hockey, you have your line mates, right? And sometimes it takes a lot of coaching to figure out who fits on the best line, who fits best where. But once you find that team that has that right amount of chemistry, you want to keep them together as long as possible, because they can form a lot of really great chemistry. They can get to know each other really well. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and they know how to work together. And that, for me, is what has led to a lot of our success as an engineering team.
You mentioned the funding round. So that was not a small funding round, $45 million, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
How was it for the engineering team to go through that transition from bootstrap to funded, especially during a very crazy time, right? 2021, close to COVID and remote work changes.
Yeah, it was a big change to be sure, but we were already pretty used to working remotely. At the time of the acquisition, at the time of the pandemic, our team, like I said, was a pretty small team, around 6 people, and three of us were based in Las Vegas. The other three were based in Bolivia, where we have our other company headquarters. And so for us, we were already used to working remotely. We would have remote stand ups every day with the team in Bolivia. And so switching to a fully remote company was not a big change for us. And I think that is in large part because we already knew how to manage that transition, right? So it wasn't a huge transition. And for me, when I'm thinking as an engineering manager, when I'm thinking about metrics, I tend to think more in terms of outcomes than in terms of performance-based metrics. And so for me, the question is like, is the product good? Is Are we on time? Is it meeting business objectives? Those are the things to me that matter the most. And I think that lends itself toward remote management because you're not so much focused on, okay, when is this person in the office? How much code are they committing on a daily basis? Things like that. Really, for us, it's more about are you achieving or are you helping the team to achieve our business objectives?
You spoke a little bit about the change to remote and the fact that you guys were already used to that in a way. Did you have to change or adjust anything in the way you build teams or manage teams when you realized, okay, so this is going to be fully remote for a while?
Yeah, I think it did open some doors for us, right? Because we were able to look in places and geographies where we might not otherwise look. At that point, we were primarily, as a company, primarily focused in three primary locations, one being Las Vegas, another being Durham, North Carolina, which is where our US headquarters is, and then the other being in La Paz, Bolivia, where our Latin American headquarters is. But this opened up doors for us to look in other locations. And so we were able to find some really great talent in other parts of Latin America that we might not otherwise have considered. And some of those people have gone on to be some of our best individual contributors and even our best team leads. So that was really fortunate that we were able to open that door and look in that direction. One thing that we found to be more difficult to navigate is when there are major time zone differences. So working asynchronously is something that for us as a team doesn't work quite as well as finding someone who's at least in a similar time zone. So there's enough overlap there where you can work together. So to be honest with you, like we tend to look more on the U.S. and Latin American time zones than we do in other geographies.
Got it. So remote and hybrid teams were definitely one big change that happened over the past 5 years. The other one was definitely AI. And for those of you watching this episode, uh, don't miss the webinar that we've recorded recently with Ryan as a guest, where he spoke about from hype to reality how fast-growing companies are actually adopting AI to increase productivity of their engineering teams. That change, we spoke a little bit about that over the webinar, Ryan, but can you walk us a little bit through how you're looking at that change and how you're adjusting the way you manage your teams with AI adoption?
Yeah, I would say we looked at AI when it first became really relevant, around the time of ChatGPT. We really looked at it as how can we integrate this into our product in a way that would make the most sense to our customers. And it was really a pretty natural fit for us because, as you mentioned earlier, we're a low code, no code application platform where businesses can build out their workflows using as little code as possible. And so for us, AI was a very natural fit into how do we get this into our product. And so really we were looking at it more from a product perspective of how can we build this into our product than we were of how can we integrate this into our engineering team. So I would actually say it's interesting that I think we were pretty forward in terms of our integration of AI into our product compared to some of our competitors, whereas maybe we were behind. It's hard to say, but maybe we were behind in terms of our adoption of AI within our actual engineering team.
Got it. I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about managing engineering teams and just building engineering teams in 2025. I think my first question is, what do you think separates a great engineering team from one that's just okay?
For me, again, I go back to the stability and the team structure. One thing that we learned pretty early on in our after our acquisition is that we needed to get better at shipping more consistently. And so we looked at the framework that we already use. We use the Scrum framework internally. Again, I know that's something that doesn't work for every team, but it does work really well for our team. And so we kind of looked, how can we expand that out? Because we were growing our team from, like I said, 6 people originally. Now we're up to, excuse me, now we're up to around 30 people. And so we were looking at how can we scale this. And coincidentally, there happens to be something called the Scaled Agile Framework, also known as SAFe, which our Scrum Master and our CTO at the time kind of turned us on to. So we started looking at that. And SAFe is really kind of like an umbrella where you can apply that either to the whole company or to a group within the company to scale the Scrum framework across multiple teams. And so for us, that's the framework that really was key to our success in being able to ship much more consistently. We moved to a quarterly release model shortly after our new CTO came on after the acquisition, and we've seen a ton of success in actually being able to ship on time. Shipping with quality is something that has still been a struggle for us, but I think it's always that struggle between speed and quality, right? So we're constantly finding the right balance there. But I think the scaled agile framework really helped us. And then the other thing, like I said, stability, putting people into teams. Because we have a large engineering team of over 30 people, we decided to break that team down into smaller groups so that they could, again, akin to the hockey analogy, kind of get to know their line mates, get to know the people that they're working with. And that's really borne fruit over the past couple of years as we've seen that play out. And some of our best individual contributors turned out to be really great team leads, right? And these are people who we saw they were making really great individual contributions. And we wanted to give them a chance to also become team leads because we saw that they kind of had an organizational prowess that not every engineer has. And so for us, that's been the key to our success is really just finding the right people, putting them in the right position to succeed. And not being afraid to make changes too, right? Like
Mhm.
if we find an individual contributor, we give them a chance to lead, and it doesn't work out, that's okay. We can move them back into an IC role, and everyone's still happy. So for us, that's really been the key.
Got it. And you spoke a little bit about finding the right people. Um, what are you seeing when it comes to engineering talent today versus, say, 5 to 10 years ago? What has surprised you positively or negatively in the latest vintages of tech talent?
It's interesting. I would say um, the people who have greater depth of knowledge are harder to find nowadays. You really want to try and find people who maybe have been at it a while, which is not to say that we're biased against newcomers. We have some great people on our team who started out as juniors and really worked their way up. But it's about finding the right mindset, I think, and finding people who are curious about technology and people who like troubleshooting and who like figuring out how things work. For us, that's been the key to finding the right types of people.
Got it. You spoke a little bit about newcomers. What do you say to young people who are thinking about learning how to code today? With all the advancements in LLM code generation, how do you see the future of a career in coding?
That's a really tough question, and it's hard to say where it's going to go. One thing that I said in the webinar is I do think that the people with a vested interest in people buying into AI, they're really hyping up the technology, and they may be right. They may end up turning out to be correct, but I think you have to balance that with the reality of the situation, which is that AI doesn't have the full context of what you're trying to do. It doesn't have the business context of what you're trying to do. It often doesn't have the full context of the code base that you're looking at, especially in organizations where you have a lot of different code bases or you have a very large code base. And so for me, I still think there's a lot of room for people who, as I said earlier, have that depth of knowledge. And so for a young person looking to get into engineering, I would say it's still really important to not become over reliant on the AI and to really dedicate yourself to learning how to code without the AI as well. no doubt it can serve as a very useful tool, and it will continue to serve as a useful tool, and I'm sure that it will continue to increase in value over time. But if you want to find a permanent home in this industry, I think developing the depth of knowledge is important. And then the other thing, as I said earlier, like what's contributed to ICs becoming really good team leads is like organizational skills and planning skills and people management skills, right? Like, so the more you can relate to other people, the more you can get good at project planning and learn about scaled agile and things like that. I think the better off you'll be.
Great. I think that's a great point of view of, sorry. Um, I need to tie this in. Okay. Um, yeah, I agree that those skills are very valuable for engineering leaders. What advice would you give to ICs who are aspiring engineering leaders? What can they do today to develop those skills?
I think it really just looks like taking ownership of things. One thing that worked for me in kind of moving into that position is finding areas where I felt there was a gap, right? Whether it was a gap in knowledge or just a gap in, hey, nobody's handling this thing right now. Let me see if I can pick it up. Look for areas where you can plug yourself in and contribute. And don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to use your voice and to speak up and say, hey, I think we could be doing this thing differently. Or just, sometimes in meetings, don't be afraid to kind of take the lead in a call. If you find an awkward silence and you feel that you have something valuable to contribute, don't be afraid to jump in and share your voice, because I think people will respond to that positively if you have something positive to contribute.
Is being an engineering leader something you've always aspired to, or just an opportunity that popped up when you were an IC and, did it pan out to be everything you expected it to be?
That's a great question. I think I didn't necessarily see myself on the path to leadership, but I am a person who does like to fill in gaps where I see them. So uh, I always like to take the lead on things, and in even in group projects in school, I tended to be someone who would take the lead on those. And so it felt like kind of a natural transition or natural fit. And my engineering manager at the time, I think maybe he saw that in me, and he offered me to become the tech lead of the team first. And then he ended up going to another company, and he set me up really well for success. And he even recommended me to the executive team and said, "Hey, I think this might be the person that could replace me." And obviously, I'm very appreciative to him for that. But I think it was just kind of a natural fit for me because that's kind of my personality. I tend to be more of an introvert, but when it comes to workplace settings and things like that, I like to, like I said, really fill in gaps where I see them and kind of take ownership of things.
It's a great point. Um, Final question. What's an opinion that you have as an engineering leader that sort of goes against the grain of what is considered commonly accepted best practice?
Yeah, I think it probably goes back to metrics, which is interesting that we're planning to have this webinar about metrics pretty soon. And it's related to what I said earlier, which is I think that outcomes outweigh team and individual performance metrics, right? Like I said, is the product good? Is the product stable? Is the product meeting business objectives? To me, as an engineering manager, those are the things that matter most. And individual metrics can help identify maybe people who are struggling within a team, right? But as an engineering manager, I think your role is to discern whether the metrics actually match up to reality, right? And so maybe a metric can kind of raise the flag for you on someone who's struggling, and then you can reach out to them and see, or look into it more deeply and find out if that's true. I don't think metrics should ever be the determining outcome in how you're dealing with a person or a team. I think they should maybe point to things, and they might highlight things that you might otherwise miss. But I would say that a good engineering manager and a good team lead are going to probably pick up on those issues before the metrics even show them. So for me, metrics are very important, but like I said, it's more on the outcome side than it is on the performance side.
It's a great point of view. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. How can our listeners stay in touch with you? LinkedIn, X?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on X and Instagram is Ryan Cooley, RyanCooley. I'm on LinkedIn under the same name. So yeah, happy to chat if you have differing opinions or anything like that. Happy to hear them.
All right, great stuff. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Tech Teams Today podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks so much for tuning in. And don't forget, we're going to have a webinar on March 13th, Engineering Team Metrics That Actually Matter in 2025. You'll find the registration link in the notes of this episode. Thanks again. See you there.